All right, this is a topic of tremendous interest to me. I've been interested in what happened to the apostles for a number of years, and I've done a good little bit of writing about it. But in the past year, I've had the opportunity to give attention to a special project, and it's related to Christian History Magazine, which obviously is a magazine I would be very interested in, and I've been a subscriber for many years and a donor as well. And about a year ago, I was invited to be an advisory editor for an issue. And when they asked what I wanted to write about, I said, what happened to the apostles? And so we've been working on that. And here is the results, the fruit of our efforts. And I'll tell you more about that in just a little while and how you can get access to it. But let's talk about what happened to the apostles. And we're going to begin by ignoring Judas Iscariot, okay? Because he was never truly an apostle. After he betrayed the Lord Jesus and committed suicide, he was not sent out with that message. And so he is not an apostle. Instead, we're going to look at the first of the apostles who died as a martyr, and that was James the Great. Okay? James is the son of Zebedee. He's the brother of the apostle John. He's called James the Great to distinguish him from James the Less, who's James the son of Alphaeus, one of the lesser known of the apostles. And we'll talk about him later. But James the Great was beheaded by Herod Agrippa in 44 AD. Let me read that. Let me read that story from Acts chapter 12. Now, about that time, Herod, the king, Herod Agrippa, laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. And of course, this was the occasion on which Peter escaped miraculously from the prison. But James was beheaded by the order of Herod Agrippa. As we go through these slides, you'll see an image to illustrate each of the apostles. And these are statues that I saw in the St. John Lateran Basilica in Rome, one of my favorite churches in Rome. And it's lined on either side by these more than life-size statues of the different apostles. And so this was the artist's rendition of James the Great.
Right. When were they made? How far down the line was the artist conceiving, in other words?
The Middle Ages. I'd say 1200. Yeah, the Renaissance era. Yeah. So there's a legend about James the Great. It's the legend of Santiago, Spanish for Saint James. James, according to this legend, James evangelized northern Spain before his martyrdom in Jerusalem. And he returned to Jerusalem. There he was martyred. His disciples retrieved his body and buried it in the church Santiago de Compostela. And it is a pilgrimage site even to this day. However, I put no faith in this legend. It originated in the 7th century. And in the Middle Ages, James became the patron saint of Spain. So I think Spain was just kind of wanting just a little touch of apostolic favor, all right? And so they told this story, all right? That's going to be quite common among the apostolic acts. All right, according to another tradition, the executioner assigned to behead James was inspired by James's faithful witness to confess his own faith in Jesus Christ, and so he also was beheaded. So they had to call in the backup executioner. In this beautiful painting, you'll see that there is one person already beheaded. This was the executioner, and then this is James about to submit to execution. Now, this might be as good a time as any just to alert you to the fact that we have many legends based upon the apostles. There are a number of apostolic acts. Many of them are fantastic and even mythological in their stories about the apostles. And here's a reason why. Because of the prestige attached to each of the apostles, even those who were lesser known, it brought about prestige to a church to say that they had been founded by an apostle, or if they were built near the place of an apostle's martyrdom. And so many churches enjoyed telling stories about the apostles related to their church. And so obviously not all of these stories are going to be true. Okay? And so we found, as we were putting together the articles for this magazine, that we could not sort out truth and fiction. In fact, most of it looked like fiction to us, and certainly was difficult, if not impossible, to verify. So our task was to report as many of the fables as we could in some kind of coherent story to communicate to our readers how revered the apostles were, how widely the apostles traveled, and ultimately to tell stories about their deaths. Okay, and so fortunately for James, the son of Zebedee, we have a biblical account to verify his death. Obviously, there still were stories and layers added onto that, but in many of the cases we're going to look at tonight, some of them will be a bit extreme. I'll show you what I mean later on. All right, Simon Peter was certainly the leader of the apostles, and we don't have any biblical account of his later life, ministry, and martyrdom, but nonetheless we do have certain things in the Bible, and we have some information about Peter that's more reliable than other sources of information. All right, we can say with some degree of confidence that Simon Peter was crucified during Nero's persecution in the late 60s, say around 67. And you'll see this very beautiful painting by Caravaggio, who's one of my favorite Renaissance artists, that depicts Simon Peter being crucified and hung upside down. We'll talk about the truth of that story in just a minute. Okay, now we are very confident that Simon Peter went to Rome late in his life and ministry. And one reason for that is his letter, his first letter, that he sent to Christians in northern Turkey. Toward the close of it, he says, she, or the church, who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. Okay? We do not think that Simon Peter was in ancient Babylon in what is current Iran. We believe that Babylon was a code word for the city of Rome, because it was the city at enmity with God's people, as Babylon had been in the Old Testament times. And so he's writing from Rome, and notice that he is with Mark, that is to say John Mark, whom we read about in Acts, who is the source of the Gospel of Mark. But it's not just this letter. Clement of Rome, who was Bishop of Rome in the 90s, just decades after Jesus' death and resurrection, Peter's own death, Clement of Rome gives us that information, that Peter was in Rome. Ignatius, Irenaeus also are early church fathers whom we can trust, and they brought about that claim. Then there's the Acts of Peter. This is the first of the apostolic acts we'll talk about, and it's an extensive story. It has some very strange overtones to it. It has some elements of Gnosticism, which was a heretical tradition, heretical idea at the time. We'll talk about heresies in 2 weeks, okay? But nonetheless, it has a heretical overtone to it. But perhaps it drew from truth when it talked about Peter in Rome. All right? I've already talked about the Gospel of Mark. We believe that it was Peter's gospel, that when Mark wrote his gospel, he was recalling the memoirs of Peter. This comes to us from an early church father named Papias, who wrote around 120 AD, and his writings were preserved by Eusebius. Eusebius of Caesarea was a church historian writing about 325. Okay? And so he quotes Papias telling us that the Gospel of Mark was based on Peter's memoirs. Now, there also is a tradition that Peter was Bishop of Rome, the first Bishop of Rome. Bishop comes from the Greek word episkopos, meaning overseer. And so, of course, if Simon Peter came to Rome, he certainly would be well respected among all the house churches that were there. And so he would have been given some authority. Okay? Now, whether that authority translates to what we know as the Bishop of Rome, that could be an exaggeration, or at least it could be a point made by later church fathers like Jerome, who's wanting to elevate the papacy. But it's not only Jerome, but also Irenaeus talks about Peter as the first bishop of Rome. Let me point out the statue of Simon Peter in St. John Lateran Basilica. Notice that he's holding a set of keys. Throughout Rome, really throughout the early church, most representations of Peter show him with the keys, because at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus said some very flattering things about Simon Peter. When Jesus asked, "Who do men say that I am?" then he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then Jesus said, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of John, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. Okay, and so the keys of the kingdom usually accompany the appearance of Peter in artwork. Next semester, shall we say, the next series that I teach here at the Met will be Understanding Our Catholic Neighbors. And we'll spend some time talking about the rise of the papacy and what this means to the church, the Catholic Church in particular, the church as a whole. So I'm going to pass on that discussion tonight. But nonetheless, I did want to point out the keys in this representation. All right, now we come to one of the most intriguing questions about Peter's martyrdom, and that is, was he crucified upside down? The very first story that we have of Peter's upside down crucifixion comes from the Acts of Peter. And as I said, this story of Peter has some very unusual tones to it. And when Peter is crucified upside down, he uses this as an opportunity to give a kind of Gnostic speech about how creation is turned upside down, and we see God better from this position. All right, and so this does not really sound like something that Peter would say. All right. However, Origen, which comes later but still around 200, Origen is a much more trustworthy source, and he gives us the idea that many of us have heard in the past, that when Peter was condemned to be crucified, he made the statement, "Oh, I'm not worthy to die in the same manner as my Lord." And so they arranged to have him crucified upside down. Okay. Now, so this comes a little bit later, but nonetheless, possibly it comes from a kernel of truth. We do know that the Roman soldiers, as cruel as they were, would crucify their victims in many different positions, and this, of course, would be one even more cruel than the typical upright crucifixion. All right, so there you go. Possibly he was crucified upside down. However, almost definitely Peter was crucified in Rome under the persecution of Nero. And again, we'll talk about the persecution under Nero next week. You know, the task of the church historian is to say everything all at once, okay? And can't do that, all right? So I kind of have to tell things in a linear fashion, but sometimes I'll kind of give some spoilers about what's coming up. All right, here is a picture from the movie Quo Vadis, made in 1951, all right, so quite a while ago, even the year before I was born. It came out starring with Finley Curry representing Simon Peter, okay. This movie is, Margie and I watched it just last night, and like for the umpteenth time. There was a time when I assigned it to my students to watch Quo Vadis and write a review of it, a historical review, to compare Hollywood to history, okay? I don't assign that anymore because it became more and more difficult for the students to locate and secure. But nonetheless, if you have access to it, you can stream it somehow, it's worth watching. It is, in my opinion, an excellent representation of the first century Christian persecution, particularly under the cruelty of the Emperor Nero. Okay, now it does have a number of very Catholic images, all right? So it does have that kind of tone, but on the other hand, is based on a story written by a Polish Catholic. So it comes by that tone naturally. And so, I recommend it if you have opportunity to watch it. But nonetheless, this film definitely shows Simon Peter saying he's not worthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. It shows him being crucified upside down. All right. Sometimes looking at my PowerPoints is kind of like sitting in on a travelogue, and I hope that I do not bore you, okay? But it's been one of the great privileges of my life to travel, and New Orleans Baptist Seminary took me to many different places. And so I've been to Rome 3 different times. In fact, in 2013, I was here at this spot with 200,000 of my closest friends to observe the inauguration of Pope Francis. Okay?
Oh, wow. Cool.
But this was this past March, obviously not nearly as busy that day, for which I'm grateful. But nonetheless, this is St. Peter's Basilica, and a beautiful church, really my favorite church in Rome. And inside is the canopy above the altar, and deep beneath the altar are the bones of Simon Peter. Well, I actually happen to believe that that's true, because the excavations have been made and tests have been made. They found some bones of a man who was probably about 60 years old at the time, and they date back to the 1st century. Nonetheless, that's what's going on here at St. Peter's Basilica. All right, well, let's talk about John, the beloved disciple. Early tradition says that after his brother James was martyred, and John, knowing that persecution was breaking out against the Christians, he took Mary, Jesus' mother, left Jerusalem, and went to Ephesus, there on the western coast of what is now Turkey, and there's where he wrote his gospel. Now, this statue in St. John Lateran John is accompanied by an eagle, and that is because the eagle is the symbol of John's gospel. And you see John is holding a book, which is a symbol that he was a New Testament writer. All right. But we do have an excellent, if fantastic, story about John, the beloved disciple. In 95, the Emperor Domitian was ruling the empire, and Domitian wanted to be worshipped as a god in his lifetime. Usually divinity was assigned to the emperors after their death, but Domitian said, "Why wait? Okay, I want to be worshipped now." And so he sent an order out to all the cities that they should gather in the town square and burn some incense to him. John, of course, would not, pastoring there in Ephesus, and so Domitian called him to Rome, and he attempted to boil him in oil. Okay, so this took place in supposedly in the Colosseum, and people gathered around. They raised him up and submerged him in the boiling oil, and he was just like, "Oh, this is an invigorating bath." So he survived. This, of course, according to legend, but this is a legend told by Tertullian, the Carthaginian church father, who is certainly not above exaggeration or telling tales, but nonetheless he is fairly reputable, and at least at least it tells us that this story was circulating and was believed by some. Okay. Now, it was after he survived this boiling oil, when Domitian realized he could not kill John, he just sent him back to Ephesus, where he was exiled on Patmos. And of course, that's where we pick up the story in the scripture, Revelation 1:9. John talks about being in exile for the sake of the Lord Jesus. Okay, so he's in exile on Patmos. Now, after Domitian's death, then John returns to Ephesus, and here's another story where the priest of Diana, and Ephesus was known as housing one of the seven wonders of the world, the temple to Diana or Artemis, and the priest challenged John to drink poison. And in fact, to ensure that what he drank was truly deadly, the priest called to the prison for them to bring two convicted prisoners, and he had them drink the poison, and they of course died. And then the priest called on John to drink the poison or to renounce his faith in Christ. Well, John drank the poison and survived, and then said, told the priest, all right, I've survived your poison, would you convert? He said, I'll convert if you'll raise these two dead men back to life, which John did, and the priest did convert. In fact, he became a bishop in Ephesus, according to this story. All right, but this story comes to us from a collection of stories called the Golden Legends, and which came out in the medieval age. It was a medieval book that was hagiography, that is to say, writings about the saints. There were some very fantastic stories, all right? And this is one of them. But it was a bestseller of its day because people were wanting to read these stories. All right. But beyond this, there is no account of John's martyrdom. And he is the only apostle who is assumed to have lived a long life and to have died from natural causes. And of course, this idea comes from John's own gospel, the last chapter, which is the restoration of Peter when the resurrected Jesus appears to Peter and John and other disciples, and Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? And he says, yes, I do. Did that 3 times. And then John is following along, and Jesus tells Peter that truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you'll stretch out your hands. Someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not want to go. John says that this, Jesus said, signifying by what kind of death Peter would glorify God. Okay? And then Jesus said to Peter, follow me. But Peter then turned around, looked at the disciple whom Jesus loved, which was John, and said, what about him? And Jesus said, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Okay? Then John said that because Jesus said this, the legend grew up, the saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. That's not what Jesus said. He just said, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? But the church did expect John to live a long life and then to die of old age, or perhaps not die at all, but simply Jesus would return, or might even assume him up to heaven. But according to Jerome, John lived until the end of the 1st century, 68 years after Jesus' passion. And here's a picture of John's tomb in Ephesus. It's empty, by the way. They've excavated. There's nothing there. Oh, have y'all been to Ephesus?
Yeah, we went on the Greek trip a few months ago, but I don't remember seeing that particular spot, but we did go to Ephesus.
Okay, good. Well, this is really on the outskirts
Oh.
of Ephesus. Yeah.
Why is it empty?
There are no bones there. It marks his burial place, but there's nothing buried there. So we have no proof that that's John's tomb. But it does commemorate the fact that John was in Ephesus as a pastor. Okay? All right, Andrew. At this point, we're getting beyond any biblical information. And so I'm going to be following, instead of any kind of chronological order, I'm just following the order in which the apostles appear in the various lists in the Gospels and the book of Acts. Of course, not all the lists are exactly the same, but I'm following generally that order. So we're going to come to Andrew, who was crucified at Patras in Achaia, which is southern Greece, 60 AD. So actually died even before Peter did. But he died on a cross in the shape of Achaia. You can see it better in this statue. This statue I saw in St. Peter's Basilica. Beautiful statue, beautiful work of art, and it's right across from the canopy that marks his brother Peter's tomb. So that's why the statue is there. Okay. Now, we have many stories connected to Andrew. Okay. It seems that they can't all be true. But the stories include ideas that he evangelized in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, in Cappadocia, Galatia, and Bithynia. Then Scythia and Byzantium, which would be more Central Asia. Finally, he went to Greece, Thrace, Macedonia, Thessaly, and Achaia, north to south. So any one of these three groups might be true, but probably not all of them. But I always focus on Achaia. The Roman governor of Achaia ordered Andrew to be crucified by being bound, not nailed, to a cross that was built in the design of the Greek chi, which for us looks like the English letter X. He had him bound so that he would linger longer in his death. And in fact, the expectation was that wild animals and the birds would eat on his flesh while he's out exposed. So he had a lingering death on this chi-shaped cross. So this was in Patras, which is kind of the western coast of Greece. I was in Greece in October of 24 and tried very hard to get over to Patras. The tour didn't go in that direction. I tried in two different directions and didn't have any success. So I didn't get to that church. I'm so sorry. But the Bishop Regulus of Patras, and by the way, by the 4th century, of course, the Roman Empire is Christian, okay, no longer ruled by pagans. Now it's actually a Christian nation. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. But the bishop learned from an angel that Emperor Constantius intended to invade the territory and to confiscate Andrew's remains and remove them to Constantinople, which was at that time the capital of the empire. Okay, now why would he want to do that? Well, these relics brought prestige, okay? And from the time of Constantine, the goal had been to bring as many apostolic relics as possible to Constantinople to be housed in one major church. But the angel instructed Regulus to remove Andrew's relics and then just head in a westward direction. And so Regulus gathered up the bones, headed west, and ultimately landed in Scotland, where he founded a church called St. Andrew's Church. Okay? And so this then becomes the background for the connection of Scotland to St. Andrew. Centuries later, in the 9th century, the Scottish Picts, were at war with the Angles of England, and so the Scottish king Hungus, or Angus, think about that, he heard a voice from heaven identifying himself as the Apostle Andrew, and he promised victory and foretold there would be the sign of the cross in the sky as proof, but not the cross that we think of, but of course the X-shaped cross. And on the day of the battle, the king saw rays of light forming the X-shaped cross in the blue sky. His soldiers advanced with the battle cry, "St. Andrew, be our patron, be our guide." And so with St. Andrew on their side, they won the victory. And for this reason, the Scottish flag bears the X-shaped white cross on a blue, sky blue field. Okay. From the 8th century, Andrew has been the patron saint of Scotland, and the Scottish flag depicts St. Andrew's white cross on a sky blue field. This is why everything in Scotland is named for St. Andrew. Yes, sir?
Who named St. Andrew's Church St. Andrew's Church?
Who gave the name to the church? Well, it would have been Bishop Regulus when he brought the bones westward and landed in Scotland. He founded the church and named it after his patron apostle, Andrew. Okay? Who I guess is the patron saint of golf, right?
Yeah.
All right. Next, we turn our attention to Philip, who traveled with Bartholomew to Phrygia, which is central Turkey. And there, as the story goes, he killed a large snake that had been worshipped by the pagans. Notice in this statue it shows his foot on a large serpent. At the end of his life, he was crucified alongside Bartholomew. But Philip kept on preaching, even though he was hanging. He kept preaching and aggravating the people. He was either crucified on a tall cross, which is often how his death is represented in artwork. But I've read the Acts of Philip, and it says that he was hung by hooks through his heels and hung upside down. Bartholomew was crucified in a slightly more natural way, just being nailed to a wall. But because Bartholomew was less aggravating, they took Bartholomew down, and set him free. Philip, however, died there on that cross. Margie and I were in October of 2022. We took a trip throughout Turkey, looking at the 7 churches and other sites, and we went to Hierapolis, and there we saw Philip's tomb, and then not far away at all is what's called Philip's Martyrium. It is a church that was built to commemorate his martyrdom. Okay, so that's Philip. Next, we'll look at Bartholomew, who was Philip's companion. And really, if our understanding is correct, then Bartholomew would have been Philip's companion from the beginning. We believe that Bartholomew is the same person as Nathanael mentioned in John chapter 1. You'll recall the story, Philip having met Jesus and had come to believe that he's the Messiah. He found Nathanael and said, "Come, we found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth." Remember, Nathanael said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" All right, but we never see the name Nathanael among the lists of the apostles. And so we believe that Nathanael, whose name means a gift of God, okay, that his second name was Bartolomai, the son of Ptolemy, and Bartolomai in Greek is Bartholomew. So Nathanael, Bartholomew, the same person. When you look at the apostles list, Philip and Bartholomew are always next to each other, and they appear together in the Acts of Philip, which take place in Phrygia. Now, after he was released from his crucifixion, he also evangelized elsewhere in Turkey, also in Iran, India, Ethiopia, Persia, and Egypt. Now, that's many places. Would have been very difficult for him to be in all of those places. But at least churches in all of those places wanted that connection. Now, there are also a number of stories of his martyrdom, but the one that is best known is that he was flayed alive and then crucified, which means that they peeled his skin off his body in such an agonizing, painful experience that actually did not bring death, but just brought lingering pain. And so then he was either crucified or he was beheaded. This took place in Armenia. So most often he's shown holding his own skin and the flaying knife. This is, again, back to St. John Lateran, and he's holding his skin, and you can see his face in the skin.
Oh,
I'll tell you, this is, of course, what's amazing is not only the story, but the artistry in this statue. Okay. And this is not the only place we see it. In the Sistine Chapel. Has anybody been to the Sistine Chapel? Okay, wonderful. Man, the first time I walked in, I just wept to be there. But on one end is Michelangelo's Last Judgment. We see Jesus here, ready to, poised to pronounce judgment at the last. I've got time to tell this story, okay? I didn't plan to, and so you really can't see what I'm talking about, but when Michelangelo was painting this mural, of course you can see it's massive, and you can see there's quite a bit of nudity. Actually, some of it was covered up by the order of a later pope who had a painter come and paint sashes in appropriate places. But there was one cardinal that came in and was very critical that Michelangelo was painting so much nudity in the Sistine Chapel inside the St. Peter's Basilica. And so to get even, Michelangelo painted in this lower corner, again you can't see it, but just at the door of Hades, he painted this cardinal, fully nude, with a great serpent wrapped around him, and the serpent's head covering up the man's private parts. Okay. And so the cardinal, of course, went to the Pope, who was Julius II, to complain about Michelangelo's treatment, and the Pope said, we're just going to leave it as it is. Okay. And so for centuries, Tour guides have been telling that story about this poor cardinal. All right, but more to our point, here
Right there.
here in the center we have Bartholomew holding his skin, and then here's a close up, and you'll see the skin with the face. Michelangelo actually painted a self-portrait in the skin of Bartholomew. Okay, so Bartholomew has captured a lot of the imagination of artists because of his method of martyrdom. Well, this here's one more slide about Bartholomew. This is St. Bartholomew's Church in Rome. And I was there back in 2013, and the church has an altar that's kind of a tub, like a tub, and inside that tub there's his skin and some of his bones. Now, they didn't lift up the lid and show it to me, okay, but they told me that it's there, and why should I not believe them, right? In the apse, that is in the very front of the church, there's a painting of Bartholomew being stretched upward and a man with a knife flaying him. And then the St. Bartholomew's Church is not only dedicated to Bartholomew, but also to modern day martyrs around the world. And so along the sides of the church are different chapels for martyrs in China and Europe, Russia, and here is a picture of a chapel dedicated to the martyrs in Africa, okay, but modern martyrs. So St. Bartholomew's Church is an interesting destination in Rome. All right, Thomas was stabbed by 4 soldiers with spears in India, 72 AD. So here's a picture of that. And I like to call him Daring Thomas. We think of him as the doubter, and yet when you read the stories about his life, he really took on courage as he lived and died for Jesus. The first story we have is he evangelized the Parthians. Today we would think of them as the Persians, but this was the major region just to the east of the Roman Empire. But what most captures our attention is his evangelization in India. This is based on the Acts of Thomas. It says that he built a palace for a king, and therefore the statue shows him holding a builder's square. The story goes that the king had given him a sizable fortune to build the palace, but he had spent the funds on feeding the poor. When the king discovered this, he was much perturbed with Thomas, but Thomas assured him that he was building for the king a treasure in heaven. Okay? But nonetheless, Thomas eventually built the palace for the king. And then, according to a much disputed legend, Thomas evangelized in China. Okay? And then he returned to India and was martyred because he converted the wife and the son of a king. So, as I said, he was stabbed by four soldiers with spears.
So that wasn't a battle of some kind. They were just
No, it wasn't a battle.
executioners.
No, the king had taken Thomas out to a wilderness area, and his followers were there. But the king wanted to speak privately with Thomas, so he took him off to a hill. taking along 4 bodyguards, okay? But the purpose was to get Thomas away from his followers so that the king could assign his 4 soldiers to stab him. So that was his death. And this hill is commemorated in India by this chapel. And there's debate on whether or not Thomas actually went to India, and yet the Christians in India claim that Thomas founded their church. And this chapel is dedicated to him, and across the altar is Senora da Expectacao, okay, which means Our Lady of the Expectation. Okay, so this chapel is dedicated to Thomas and, of course, Mary. This chapel was built in 1523. Inside the chapel, there is a painting of Mary and the baby Jesus. This painting, allegedly, was created by Luke, the evangelist. Now, again, legends abound related to these people. But nonetheless, I think there's enough evidence for us to believe that Thomas did go to India and found the church there.
Is that a Catholic church or an Orthodox church?
It's a Thomist church. Okay, they consider themselves Thomas Christians. It certainly has a lot of overtones of Catholicism. Okay, or maybe even Orthodox, but nonetheless they don't claim one or the other. They say that they are Thomas Christians.
So they're not affiliated with Rome, that church?
I do not believe so. I could be wrong, but I believe that it is not. Okay. Now, China. This fascinates me because I went to China 3 different times. The first time was in 2006 to see my sister. My sister was a missionary in China for 28 years. And when she went at age 52, okay, as a widow, and then 28 years later, at age 71, China withheld her worker's visa, and so she had to come back to the United States. I went again in 2011 to help her move back to the States, but it takes more than the Chinese government to keep my sister down. Okay, she then proceeded to apply for tourist visas, and she continued to spend time in China. She'd be there for 4 months in China, 2 months in the United States. 4 months in China, 2 months in the United States, and she did that for many years until COVID. And finally, she had to leave. In fact, she took the last plane out of Beijing to Texas in February 1 of 2020. And so she has, she's now well into her 80s, and she's already been back a couple of different times and is going back again in October. So, but the first time I went, she shared with me a newspaper clipping, which I still have, that tells the story of a Chinese scholar named Professor Wang Weifan, and he had found some stone carvings that he says are dated between 125 to 220 AD, and he believes that they picture biblical stories such as the creation, the fall, 4 fishermen, and the nativity. Okay, so the article is showed us a rubbing of the carving of the nativity. So here in the center we have Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus Over here we have wise men and shepherds, and over here we have Herod's assassins, okay, according to Professor Wei Fong. All right. Now, if you read the magazine, there's an article there by a friend of mine who is really well versed in Christianity in China, because he taught at a seminary in Hong Kong for many years. He does not believe that Thomas made it to China, and I must admit that it's kind of a stretch. But I tend to teach the stretch,
Yeah.
okay, because it's more interesting. Here's another story, and I might as well make this disclaimer early on. All right, I'm a John Wayne fan, right? And one of my favorite John Wayne movies is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Okay, very good. So you know this story. All right. So the story is about the death of a violent gunman, and the man who shot Liberty Valance was played by Jimmy Stewart, and he went on to become a senator and a major political figure, and he led a life of fame and fortune. Okay. But at the end of his life, he finds out that no, he was not the one who killed him. He shot the gun, but the man who killed him was the John Wayne character, who after that moment faded into the background, lost the girl he loved, lost his house, lost his living, and became an unknown figure. And so Jimmy Stewart tells the story, the true story, to the newspaper editor and his reporter. And when it turns out that the man who shot Liberty Valance was not Jimmy Stewart, the reporter said, "Do we print this story?" And the editor said, "No. When legend meets the truth, always print the legend." Okay? And so as a church history teacher, I usually teach the legend, because it's more interesting, all right? But usually I will tell both stories. How about that? All right.
Your sister believes that Thomas did go to China? Okay.
No, in fact, she finally got to visit the place where these stone carvings are on display, and she recognized that these carvings could depict many things other than biblical accounts. So you can, yeah, there are different interpretations, right? And so no, she doesn't really believe that, but she loves to tell that story, right? Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to Matthew. This is another of the Caravaggio paintings. He's also the one who did the Crucifixion of Simon Peter. Caravaggio is really my favorite of the Renaissance artists. And we have Matthew being killed by a sword at the order of the king of Ethiopia. And he's reaching up, and the angel is passing down the palm of martyrdom. Next week, when we look at persecution, we'll talk about how icons of martyrs generally depict the martyr holding a palm, because in the book of Revelation, chapter 9, John looks around and sees a multitude, and they all are carrying palm branches. And then the angel reveals to John that these are those who came out of the tribulation. Right? So palm branches are associated with martyrs. So that's what that picture is about. Right in the background, we see this person who's kind of watching on at Matthew's death. This is a self-portrait of Caravaggio. All right, Matthew was a former tax collector, gospel writer. And so in this statue, we see him holding his book and reading it, and then his foot is on a money bag. So I'm kind of amazed at all the details that are in these statues in this basilica.
But they all have those robes, you know, they all have those curly lady robes.
Robes,
Yeah.
yes. And they, the sculptor kind of just added some of the ways, just
Yeah.
make it very artistic, very beautiful. So, it's said that he remained in the Holy Land for 15 years while he, composed the gospel. But then, once he started traveling, he was on the move. Went to North Africa and Egypt, Persia, and Ethiopia. And it was in Ethiopia where he was martyred. The king lusted for his own niece. Matthew would not approve of this marriage. And so he was killed by a soldier with a halberd, that is a spear with a sword at the end. But there are other death stories. Matthew is one of the most killed of all the apostles. All right? He was beheaded, he was burned. There's another story where he drowned, or someone else says that he died naturally. Okay, but of course we don't want to think about that. We want a dramatic martyrdom. Okay, that's Matthew. James the Less. All right, this is the other James that is distinguished from James the Great. He's described as the son of Alphaeus. Do we know of another son of Alphaeus in the Gospels?
Jude.
Jude? Jude is not Jude, it's Levi. Levi is the son of Alphaeus. So Matthew is described in one place with the name Matthew. Elsewhere, he's known as Levi, the son of Alphaeus. So it might be that James, the son of Alphaeus, was the brother of Levi, the son of Alphaeus. And so, again, called the Less. Now, he is conflated by the Catholic Church with James the Just, who's the half-brother of Jesus. Okay? We don't read much about Jesus' half-brother. We do read in 1 Corinthians 15 that Jesus appeared to him and he became a believer. He had not been a believer during Jesus' life. And then he also became a pillar of the church in Jerusalem. We read about him in the book of Acts, and Paul makes reference to him. But in this statue, because the artist conflated James, the son of Alphaeus, with James, the brother of Jesus, he has him with the book of James, and he shows him with the fuller's staff that was used to kill James the Just. Again, we'll talk about James's martyrdom next week. But it's said elsewhere that he was the first bishop of Syria, and he was stoned in Jerusalem. Okay.
Where's that sculpture?
This sculpture is another one in St. John Lateran Basilica in Rome. Most of the statues we've been looking at line this beautiful basilica. It's my second favorite church in Rome. Yes, sir.
I'm not trying to defend my answer, but the Epistle of Jude starts with Jude, the brother of James.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I got my James and Judes all mixed up.
Well, and join the club. This happens often because there are a number of Jameses in the New Testament, and more than one Jude. And so yes, I can understand why you would. Jude is the next person we're going to look at. So we'll talk about Jude in just a minute. Before we do, I'll talk about this church in Rome, the Church of the Holy Apostles. You probably can't see it in this picture, but there are 12 statues up here of the apostles. This was when I was in Rome in March. This was not on our tour, and so I struck out on my own. It was a little over a mile from the hotel, and it sure seemed a lot longer than that. But nonetheless,
Just a sec.
I made my way and got there. And there's a painting in behind the altar of Philip, again on the tall cross, James being beaten by clubs, and the relics of Philip and James the Less are housed in this church. Beneath the altar, if you go down to the basement, there's a place where there are two sarcophagi, two tombs, and they house these relics. I took a picture, but believe me, you're not missing anything. It's behind a grate. You really can't see anything. But I thought the painting was beautiful, and so is the church. All right, Judas Thaddeus. He's referred to as Judas of James. And so we think he was the son of James, but what James? Okay, we don't know. Okay, but he's also referred to as Thaddeus, and so I just call him Judas Thaddeus. There's a great story that's recorded by Eusebius of Caesarea in his major book, Church History. And in book 1, at the end, chapter 13, he tells the story of correspondence between Abgar, the king of Edessa, and Jesus. Abgar heard that Jesus was being troubled, threatened by the Jews, and so he offered sanctuary to Jesus in Edessa. Okay, Jesus declined, but promised to send an apostle after his mission was completed. Okay? And then after Jesus' death and resurrection, then the story goes on that Judas traveled to Edessa. He healed Abgar, and then he preached the gospel in public. Many were converted, and Edessa Christians later credited Judas's preaching for the founding of their church. Okay? So, how true is this story? I do not know. I cannot imagine someone writing to Jesus and offering refuge, but nonetheless, that's what's told in this account. Okay. Now, in other stories, Judas teamed up with Simon the Zealot in Persia, and together they healed the sick. They performed many miracles. In Babylon alone, they converted 60,000 new believers, including the Christian who became bishop of Babylon and wrote this account. In Swanir, Persia, at a temple that was dedicated to the sun and the moon, Simon and Judas exorcised the demons in the temple. And everyone saw these two black, monstrous figures departing from the temple. So when the pagan worshipers saw their gods leaving the temple, they attacked the apostles. And so an angel appeared to the apostles and gave them a choice. The angel would kill everyone present and save the apostles, or the angel would give the apostles the palm of martyrdom, meaning they would die as martyrs. And so they chose the palm. Judas was martyred by a lance there in Persia. Simon the Zealot previously had evangelized in Britain, Egypt, North Africa, Spain, and finally Persia, where he was martyred along Judas Thaddeus by being sawn asunder. So while Judas was stabbed, Simon was sawn in two. Can you imagine the lingering, painful death? It is said that the prophet Isaiah died in that same manner under the evil king Manasseh.
Was Simon the Zealot an apostle?
Yes. He's usually last in the list, just before Judas. Yeah, and of course, the term zealot refers to the fact that he kind of belonged to that group of guerrillas who were opposed to Roman rule. And so he had been a very violent man, attacking Romans as kind of militia, okay? But he was attracted by the gospel of peace offered by Jesus. So imagine Simon the Zealot in the same group as Matthew the tax collector, okay? Which shows the power of Jesus to reconcile different points of view. Okay. So, the relics of Judas and Simon are found here in this reliquary that's in the altar dedicated to St. Joseph in St. Peter's Basilica. You know, since I was working on this magazine, I've given a great deal of thought and research to where were there relics, tombs of the apostles in Rome. And so when I was traveling through the places, I kind of looked for these spots. And so otherwise, I certainly wouldn't have seen that. But nonetheless, there it is. All right, we've got just a couple more to go, so we need to move quickly. Matthias was the apostle chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, selected not by Jesus, but by Lot. After Jesus' ascension, but before the descent of the Holy Spirit, the apostles gathered. Simon said, there needs to be 12. Okay, why was 12 such a sacred number?
12 tribes of Judah.
12 tribes of, yes, the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Peter felt like it was very important that they select a replacement. And so they selected Matthias. We don't hear anything about Matthias again in the book of Acts, other than we know that he was among the apostles when they suffered under the Pharisees and so on and so forth. And so many stories about Matthias, all right, because none of them could be verified, and so there were just lots of stories that proliferated. In Judea, Cappadocia, which is in Turkey, around the Caspian Sea. Also, he was sent to the cannibals in Parthia. Okay, there he was blinded, okay, and put in prison, but he was saved by an appearance of Jesus, who then sent Andrew to help him. All right, there's a marker in Georgia, Russia, that claims that Matthias is buried there. Okay, another tradition says he was stoned in Jerusalem and beheaded by the Jews. All right. Now, the question often is, in my mind at least, who was the disciple, the apostle, to replace Judas? The disciples selected Matthias, but later on, God brought Paul, the apostle, to the Gentiles. And so, the Revelation says that there are pearls at all of the gates, and each one has the name of an apostle. So whose name is going to be on the 12th pearl? All right.
There's
Well,
13. There's 13.
All right. Maybe there's a little extra. All right.
Okay, but didn't Paul come into the company after James was beheaded in 44? So it was still 12.
Okay. I could be. That's interesting. Thank you for that. He did say of himself, last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. For I am the least of the apostles, and not fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. Nonetheless, he refers to himself as the apostle to the Gentiles. And he evangelized in Damascus, Arabia, Tarsus, Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome. We know this from the book of Acts. We know from the book of Romans that he desired to go to Spain, and I believe he did. I believe that he was released from the imprisonment we read about in Acts 28, and then he went to Spain. That's probably when he placed Timothy in Ephesus and Titus in Crete. He writes to them during that period of time until finally he writes 2 Timothy from his imprisonment in Rome, his second imprisonment. He's often pictured with a sword, which could refer to the sword of the Spirit, but it also could be the method of his martyrdom, because he also was martyred under Nero's persecution. But because Paul was a Roman citizen, he could not be crucified, nor could he be thrown to the wild beasts. And so beheading was a more civilized form of execution. But he died about the same time as Peter. And his bones are buried at St. Paul outside the walls, a beautiful, my third favorite church in Rome. All right, so, well, we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to kind of go through this quickly. But this really is the most important part, so I'm sorry that I chased so many rabbits tonight. But in summary, I just want to say that out of all of these apostolic acts, those that are biblical and those that are legendary, many of them are not trustworthy. They're fantastic. They're mythical. They still may have kernels of truth that we can rely on, but they have 4 themes that they share, and that is apostolic authority, missions, martyrdom, and the apostles' faith is proof of the resurrection. From the earliest history until today, the apostles were respected as authorities in the church. And despite the obscurity of some apostles, churches still sought prestige from their memories by claiming that they evangelized their region or they were martyred nearby. Okay, living up to the meaning of their title, which meant the sent out one, ambassador, messenger, the apostles took seriously the commissions given by their Lord Jesus Christ, who told them to go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. He told them to be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and as far as the remotest part of the earth. And so one important lesson that we learn from the Apostles' Acts is that evangelism and missions were imperative to early Christians. You saw how each apostle, that the imagination was that they had gone to so many different places in the known world. The church believed that it was important to evangelize wherever they went. And then the apocryphal Acts, whether trustworthy or fanciful, they continue to emphasize the apostles' willingness to suffer and even to die for Jesus Christ's name. All the apostles, with the exception of John, either probably or plausibly died as martyrs. Every one of them except John. And their faithfulness in the face of persecution and martyrdom add to the many proofs we already have of Jesus' resurrection and his promise of eternal life to all who believe into him. We see how at Jesus' arrest the disciples scattered. But after his resurrection, they remained firm even in the face of suffering and persecution at the hands of the Sanhedrin. Okay. And then, of course, as they traveled about, they were willing to die for their faith in Jesus. All right, here's some resources. Write this down. Christian History Magazine. Just write down those words, Christian History Magazine. When you go to the internet and type that in, it'll take you to this magazine. You'll see this picture, click on it, and it'll take you a page where you can actually scroll through the pages and see all the beautiful artwork, okay? You can even see the articles that I wrote, along with many other good articles. Now, if you scroll down below the colorful pages, you'll actually see PDFs of every article that are easy to read, easy to print out. So what a great resource. You also can purchase a hard copy for $6. Okay, so you can purchase a copy, you can read it. All right, there are 3 books. After Acts, written by Brian Litfin, Litfin. This is an entry-level book about the apostles. Okay? I'm going to show you 2 other books, but I think you've got enough resources with Christian History Magazine and After Acts. But here's a book called The Fate of the Apostles by Sean McDowell. Perhaps you've heard of Josh McDowell. Well, Sean McDowell is his son and a scholar in his own right. And he wrote The Fate of the Apostles as an apologetic to show us that the apostles demonstrate their faith in Jesus and the proof of the resurrection. And then the last book is called The Quest for the Historical Apostles by Brian Shelton, Shelton. Brian Shelton is a dear friend of mine, and this is an excellent book. It does have a more academic tone than the others. Okay, well, we are just flat out of time, and so I'm going to go ahead and dismiss us, but if you have questions, feel free to linger afterward, and I'll be glad to help. So thank you very much. Next week, we'll do a brief survey of persecution in the early church.